The snippet of video that I'm going to share in this video is of the leader of Israel, one of perhaps the most significant leader of the state of Israel, blatantly saying dumb things. It seems as though he's lying. And perhaps he's lying about the fact that he has misremembered the figures, the details, the data. I mean, if you cornered him and say, hey, you just said all this bullshit, that's not true, he would probably say, oh, yeah, I got it wrong. I suspect that he actually is getting it wrong on purpose. Otherwise, someone please explain how such an eminent man as the Prime Minister of Israel can get such basic, simple, foundational statistics, information, data wrong.
In the areas that we handed over to the Palestinians some 30 years ago, we were controlling Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus.
This part's a little bit, this is the most complex part. It's quite nuanced, where Netanyahu makes out as if it's not really. He says they gave Bethlehem to the Arabs. Now, how on earth do you give some land to some people? You must have owned it already. How did they own this land? Well, they had a war, and they took the land off Jordan, this country called Jordan, and they basically occupied that land and dominated it, probably illegally. And then they gave it to the Arabs. They were never given that land. Bethlehem, when the UN decided this is what we think should happen, Bethlehem was given to the Arab state. And there was a massive war in that area. Bethlehem was one of the little pockets of land that were left within the area that the UN said was given to the Arab state. And Jordan took over and said, we will help run this area and look after these people. Actually, what seems to have happened is the Muslim Arabs living in that West Bank area, let's call them Palestinians, they actually, a great number of them wanted to be part of Jordan. Israel went to war with Jordan and some other countries in 1967 and apparently captured that land. And compared to the way the Jordanian government was treating those Palestinians, Israel was absolutely atrocious. It had the excuse of, we're worried these people are going to try and kill us. Probably because they knew that they hated, the whole peoples hated Israel, mainly because of what happened in the 1948 Israel-Arab War, when Israel took about 80%, or maybe 70, or something around that, of the land that the UN designated for the Arab state, which, by the way, the Arab state rejected. They said it was unfair, and then that's why the war happened, apparently. Although many people will say the war actually happened mainly because the Jews wanted more land and a higher rate of being the majority in that land. Anyway, why did Israel take this West Bank and start treating all the people there as non-citizens, as prisoners of war, basically? And I'm pretty sure under world law, it is illegal to take land by force. How does Israel give the land back in 1995, as Netanyahu said, or 1993? Anyway, now let's get to the real simple, real dumb stuff that I'm sharing here. The stuff that we can just point out simply and say, that's just really stupid or really evil to be making these lies and acting like you don't know that it's wrong.
some 30 years ago, we were controlling Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. At that time, the overwhelming majority of the Arabs living in Bethlehem were Christian Arabs, over 80%.
Okay, that was it. That was probably as dumb as it gets, but I think there's more. Maybe just as dumb. He's talking about 30 years ago, 1995, when Israel relinquished domination of Bethlehem. And he outright says that at that time, 30 years ago, the Christians were the overwhelming majority. If you ask anyone who actually knows, they'll tell you it was about 30% Christianity, the people in Bethlehem. After Arab Muslims have been controlling it for, I don't know, since the Ottoman Empire or something, hundreds of years. You know how stupid this is? Like, that this is the Prime Minister of Israel. He should know this better than anyone else. And he's saying, when we gave the land away, first of all, how'd you get the land? He said, 30 years ago, we gave the land to the Palestinian peoples, and the Christians were the majority. They weren't. They were 30%. And then now, they're a minority. That's just nuts, man. You're either really stupid or you're a liar.
Now, after 30 years, they're down to 20% because they're oppressed, and so they leave. But that's not what's happening in Israel itself. In Israel itself, they're growing, they're thriving. At that time, the overwhelming majority of the Arabs living in Bethlehem were Christian Arabs, over 80%. Now, after 30 years, they're down to 20% because they're oppressed, and so they leave. But that's not what's happening in Israel itself. In Israel itself, they're growing, they're thriving. They serve in the army. Christian Arabs serve in the army.
Really? And a really sad thing about the fact that he's here just telling these absolutely rotten bullshits is that actually when Bethlehem was 85% Christianity, the reason that changed is because Israel gave the Arabs an absolute flogging and cornered them into, well, the ones that were in the mandatory Palestine area, which Britain called mandatory Palestine in 1917 or something. Before that, it was just the Ottoman Empire, a really large piece of land. And they called this little piece of land mandatory Palestine, and we've been arguing and fighting about it. By we, I mean humanity on Earth. The sad part is, the reason Christianity is no longer a majority in Bethlehem is because of the Arab-Israeli war. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs were forced out of their homes, or tricked out of their homes, or they just ran away because they were scared. And they ended up in places near Bethlehem, in Bethlehem, two little pockets of land, West Bank and Gaza. 700,000 Arabs or something. Something like 80% of all those Arabs in that whole area of mandatory Palestine, they ended up in these about 20% of that whole land. And in that 20% was Bethlehem. Now do the basic maths and understand why there's no longer going to be an overwhelming majority of Christians in Bethlehem. Over the next 20 years, the Arabs are going to build settlements there. And then Israel comes along, gives the Arabs another flogging, the Arab coalition, and says, we're going to take this piece of land and control it ourselves now. And then that's illegal. And then they say, we're going to give you Bethlehem. Oh, by the time they took control of Bethlehem, Christianity was already not the majority, not the largest population of people, not the largest religious population in Bethlehem. It was about 45% or 40%. by the time Israel went and stole West Bank, including Bethlehem, I'll say it again, the Christianity population was already no longer the major population in that area, in that town, or whatever it is, a city. And over time, why did they end up leaving?
Arabs living in Bethlehem were Christian Arabs, over 80%. Now, after 30 years, they're down to 20% because they're oppressed. And so they leave.
So Netanyahu here says they were oppressed. He also is pretty happy to tell you that Christians in Israel serve in the army because they believe in the good fight, not because they just want a job and some money and security. It's because they believe in all this stuff. Now, the reason so many Christians actually did leave, because it's not just because all the Arabs flooded into the area after the big war, when they all basically got kicked out and they tried to come home and they weren't allowed because Israel said, sorry, it's too much security concern, and plus we've got hundreds of thousands of Jews coming in from all over the world and we need this land now. You know, so a lot of the Zionist story and rationale I can understand and I can feel and gel with. But this guy Netanyahu is seemingly controlled opposition for the serious thinkers, for the people who are really paying attention, because he's out here doing so much damage to Zionism, saying this really dumb stuff in a way that you just can't believe he doesn't know it's wrong. It's like he's just influencing Dr. Phil's army, which influences America enough to be able to, provide arms to Israel. So you should ask yourself, if you're wondering, why did all these Christians leave? Just ask yourself, when did the Christians become a majority? Was it when Netanyahu or Israel took over Bethlehem? See the way Netanyahu explains it when he says we gave them Bethlehem and it was a majority population Christian at that time, Actually, there was a majority population Christian long before the Israel state was there. Christians just happened to really try and live there, and they were living there, and the Muslim population was okay with that. Now imagine you're in the Arab state, and you guys get absolutely flogged, and Jordan's there saying you should just become Jordanian, and many of you are saying, yeah, we should just become Jordanian. And then suddenly Israel takes over your land and treats you like a prisoner of war and says, no, you're not being Jordanian. You guys are just bad and you just need to settle yourselves down and live in peace with us. Until that live in peace happens, and there's not too many people who are so angry that they want to kill people, which might never happen as long as humans are here. Until then, you're probably going to be pretty keen to get out of there. And in fact, the Christians, they had more help than the Muslims in getting out of there. More help from abroad. And generally, because they were probably more tied in with people all around the world who were saying, you should get out of there. And here's a crucial factor too, one that probably isn't really discussed, is that when you're a part of a society that has been flogged in war and jammed into some tiny little bits of land and not even allowed to take back the offer that the UN originally said, we think you should do this and just live there, you're going to be, and you're not really allowed to have full state rights, especially after Israel came and took the land and said, we own this now and you guys are all prisoners of war. You're going to be living in a kind of emergency way of life. And you're going to be not so charitable. And the Muslims are going to look after Muslims more than they look after Christians. They're going to be related to Muslims more than they are related to Christians. People generally look after their family first, then their neighbors. And when you're in a war sort of society like these people, it's going to be really a major difference in how you treat your family compared to your neighbors. And the court system and stuff, it did become a lot more Islamicized. It was hard for the Christians to live in that area than the Muslims. But it was probably easier before the Israel state was there, when there was no such pressure of the embarrassment of being flogged in a war and told to live in these tiny little bits of land crowded with all these refugees and these people who are so angry that you're living in their house now because you got nowhere else to live and they feel bad for you. Things will probably be different if you're not in that situation. So it's not like there's some terrible Islamic virus here that's destroying Christians. And it's not like Israel had Bethlehem and there were these Jews controlling it for so long and they had these Christian majority living there. No. The Christian majority ended because the Israel state was born. That's more accurate than what Netanyahu says. Way more accurate, and it could even be the most. It could even be the most fluent way in describing what's happened. But the way Netanyahu says it is just so far from reality. As if Israel procured a majority Christian population in an area called Bethlehem, and then they gave that area to the Palestinians, and suddenly all the Christians were being bashed, mistreated. That's just disgusting that this Prime Minister is saying that. And as if he doesn't know the majority population was lost about 30 years before 30 years ago. There was no overwhelming majority population Christian people in Bethlehem 30 years ago.
And I don't think there is PTSD. P stands for post. It isn't post. It's every day. It's ongoing. And I know that you have to discuss this with
in